Students, in lesson 3.3, we are going to be comparing and ordering decimals. So our essential question at the top of the page is, how can you use place value to compare and order decimals? So we are going to do the unlock the problem, which deals with a real world scenario. So this picture, boys and girls, on the right is the Tetons, which are located in the Grand Teton National Park in Wyoming. So the table lists some of the mountains in the United States that are over 2 miles high. How does the height of Cloud Peak in Wyoming compare to the height of Boundary Peak in Nevada? So in this table, boys and girls, we have the title, Mountain Heights, and then we have two columns. This is the mountain and the state, and then the height in miles. So one way we can solve this problem is we can use place value. So what we're going to do, boys and girls, is we are going to line up the decimal points. We're going to start at the left and then compare the digits in each place value position until the digits are different. So step 1, we are taking Cloud Peak from Wyoming, which is 2 and 495 thousandths miles. And then we're also going to be taking Boundary Peak in Nevada, which is 2 and 488 thousandths in miles. So we're going to line up the values according to their decimal points. So we're going to compare the ones. So when we see 2 is the same as 2, so that doesn't help us. We know that those two are equal. Now we're going to move to the right, and we're going to compare the tenths. So right after the decimal point, we see that there's a 4 and a 4. We know that 4 is equal to 4 as well, so that means that we need to move further to the right. So in step 3, we're going to compare the hundreds. We'll look and compare 9 hundredths, 8 hundredths. Boys and girls, this is something we've been talking about all week in class. Would you rather have 8 pennies or 9 pennies? Yes, that is correct, boys and girls. We would rather have 9 pennies. So we know that 9 is greater than 8. So since 9 is greater than 8, boys and girls, then the decimal 2 and 495 thousandths is greater than the decimal 2 and 488 thousandths. And then when we compare these last two, boys and girls, we would say that 2 and 488 thousandths is less than 2 and 495 thousandths. So boys and girls, in this way, what we did was we aligned up using place value, and we used the decimal. So the height of Cloud Mountain is greater than the height of Boundary Peak. So boys and girls, we're going to explore some other ways that we can use place value to compare and order decimals. Another way is that we can use a place value chart to compare. And this is something that we have been practicing already this week. So boys and girls, what we're going to do is we're going to compare the height of Cloud Peak to Wheeler Peak. So at the top, boys and girls, you can see that the one that we put down was 2 and 495 thousandths. And then the second decimal was 2 and 493 thousandths. Now, boys and girls, right above the decimal point, I'm going to put the word and, because that's something we talked about during class this week, just to keep everybody on the right track. Whenever you hear and, you know that you're talking about a decimal point. So now, boys and girls, we're going to compare. 2 is equal to 2, and let's look now to the right. We have in the tenths place 4. 4, boys and girls, is equal to 4. So that means that we have to keep moving further to the right. And remember, the further to the right of the decimal, the smaller the place value. So now we're going to compare 900ths to 900ths. Well, 900ths is equal to 900ths. So again, boys and girls, we have to move further to the right, and we're going to compare the thousandths. We know that 5 thousandths is greater than 3 thousandths, boys and girls. So since 5 is greater than 3, then 2 and 495 thousandths is greater than 2 and 493 thousandths. Now when it says and, boys and girls, we know that we're talking about a different comparison. So in the second comparison that we have here, we have 2 and 493 thousandths is less than 2 and 495 thousandths. So boys and girls, just when I first start practicing my less than and greater than signs, I like to write down them as well, just to remind myself what the symbols stand for. It's just another extra step that you can do to help you. So the height of Cloud Peak, boys and girls, is greater than the height of Wheeler Peak. So now in class, we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but I want you to think about this. It says, explain why it is important to line up the decimal points when comparing the decimals. And notice, when we use the place value chart, we line them up by the decimal point. And then when we just used place value and we lined up the decimals without a place value chart, we use the decimal point as well. So boys and girls, we're going to go on to another example. And we're also going to be talking about mountains in this example. So it says Mount Whitney in California is 2 and 745 thousandths miles high. Mount Rainier in Washington is 2 and 729 thousandths miles high. And Mount Harvard in Colorado is 2 and 731 thousandths mile high. What we're going to do is we're going to order these heights of the mountain from least to greatest. And boys and girls, you're going to see me underline least to greatest because I want to make sure that I pay close attention. We want to make sure that we are using the smallest one to the greatest one. Which mountain has the least height and which mountain has the greatest height? So what it says, boys and girls, in step 1, we're going to line up the decimal points. There are the same number of ones, so when we look at that, we're going to say it's not going to help us. We know that 2 is the same as 2 is the same as 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to circle the tenths first to compare them. So 7, 7, 7. 7 tenths. We know, boys and girls, that 7 tenths is equal to 7 tenths. So because there are the same number of tenths, we're going to have to move further to the right. So now what we're going to do, boys and girls, is we're going to underline the hundredths, and then we're going to compare the hundredths, just the hundredths place. And that's going to help us order from least to greatest. So let's go through and circle the hundredths. 5 hundredths, 9 hundredths, 1 hundredths. Now, boys and girls, let's just double check. We have 5 hundredths, 9 hundredths, and 1 hundredths. Is that the hundredths place or is that the thousandths place? Yes, that's correct, boys and girls. That is the thousandths place. So what we're going to do is we're going to underline the hundredths place. Remember, the hundredths place should always look like we're talking about the pennies if we were to be talking about money. So now, boys and girls, we can see that 2 is less than 3 and 3 is less than 4. So that means the heights in order from least to greatest are 2 and 729 thousandths, 2 and 731 thousandths, and 2 and 745 thousandths. So boys and girls, keep in mind that all we had to do was we had to compare the hundredths digit. So Mount Rainier, boys and girls, has the least height and Mount Whitney has the greatest height. Again, our little math talk down here that we're going to explore a little bit more in class. It says, explain why you do not have to compare the digit in the thousands place in order to compare the heights of the three mountains. So boys and girls, what we're talking about is, why is it okay that we stop comparing after we get to the hundreds place? So now, boys and girls, we have one more strategy, and we're going to try to use the place value chart to help us solve this problem. So it says, what is the order of 1 and 383,000, 1 and 321,000, 1 and 456,000, and 1 and 32 hundredths, from greatest to least? So now, boys and girls, we can see that this problem's a little bit more tricky because it's the opposite. Last time we were doing least to greatest. Now we're going to do greatest to least. So we're going to write each number in the place value chart, and we're going to compare the digits beginning with the greatest place value. So boys and girls, if you look on our side, you can see that I completed the place value chart by filling in these decimals. So now we're going to compare the ones. We see that the 1 is the same as 1 same as 1. So boys and girls, that doesn't really help us. Now we have to move over to compare the tens. Now, boys and girls, when we look at the tens, we see that, 4 tenths. 4 tenths is bigger than 3 tenths. So when it says compare 4 tenths, we say 4 tenths is greater than 3 tenths. So that we know the greatest number right off the back, boys and girls, is 1 and 456 thousandths. And we know it's the greatest number, boys and girls, because the 4 in the tenths place is the largest amount. Think about it. 4 dimes is bigger than 3 dimes. So we circled the greatest number in the place value chart in red. Now, boys and girls, we are going to move further to the right and compare the hundredths column. So now it says compare the remaining hundredths. So the remaining hundredths, boys and girls, we see, if we're detectives, 8 hundredths. 8 pennies is bigger, boys and girls, than having 2 pennies. So we know that the next greatest number, boys and girls, is 1 and 383 thousandths. So we are going to write that number down on the line, and we are going to draw a rectangle around that number. So now finally, boys and girls, it says compare the remaining thousandths. So we're going to move to the last column, and the only thousandths that we're going to compare is this place and this place. We see that 1 thousandths, boys and girls, is greater than 0 thousandths. So if we were to order the numbers from least to greatest, we would see that the numbers would be 1 and 456 thousandths, and we're going to use a semicolon to separate them. 1 and 338 thousandths, which was our number in the rectangle. Then we're going to have 1 and 321 thousandths, and finally we would have 1 and 32 hundredths. So boys and girls, in this lesson we used several different strategies. We used a place value chart, and we also lined up the decimals using decimal points to order and compare decimals. Remember, boys and girls, when we're comparing decimals, we start at the ones place and then we move further to the right. And the further we go from the right, it helps us analyze the decimals and the value of the decimals depending on their place value.